Mark.
Sitting back down. Sorry? Somebody was saying
Somebody
something?
spoke. Oh, Harold?
Yeah. No?
No?
Well, Baha'u'llah did say, let your vision be world embracing. So that's what I'm aiming for, something widespread here. You know, most Baha'i scholars are not doing this kind of thing. There's a lot of people mining the resources of the Islamic tradition, but not very many are doing much with Hinduism or Buddhism. So Wilbur is a Buddhist for years and years and years, and Aurobindo was a Hindu. So I think it's leaving out a lot if we don't address those two religions. Okay, so I guess we'll start again. Now that you have a sense of the scope of my plan, I thought I would begin part one by sharing a small taste of the remarkable catalyst that's responsible for kickstarting my lifelong interest in the development of the soul. Let me just see if I can do this properly. Oops. So, in the early 1960s, my father, Charles, or Chuck as he would have preferred, Charles Keedwell, experienced a series of waking dreams under the supervision of his main Baha'i spiritual teacher, Winifred Harvey. And as luck would have it, her niece, Heather Harvey, is with us this evening. So these waking dreams entered his awareness from a place he referred to as his inner country. At that time, he and my mother, Mary, had been members of the Ottawa Baha'i community for 7 or 8 years. And this is what she looked like near the end of her life. During the day, he wrote speeches for senior politicians in the Canadian federal government. The contrast between his speech writing style and the poetic, spiritual nature of these dreamlike interactions could hardly be more dramatic. The dissimilarity bewildered him for years. Where did they come from? Did he write them? He wasn't sure he could even claim to be their author. And yet he couldn't deny that he had played an active role in these otherworldly encounters with a range of fully alive, autonomous characters, including most notably Jesus, Baha'u'llah, and Abdu'l-Baha. The main character was an entity called the Fish, who he gradually came to see as his hitherto hidden inner self. By the time the stories came to an end 2 years later, he had accumulated almost 300 pages of dialogue. He decided to call his waking dream journal Conversations with a Fish and Others. My father began sharing these deeply personal but curiously universal stories with me when I was 13 or 14. Immediately and over the ensuing years, they had a substantial impact on who I believed I was and who I was to become. They also led directly to my ongoing fascination and respect for higher dimensions of reality, which eventually led to 2 university degrees in world religions. While my field of study did not translate into a real-world career, I did have the opportunity about 12 years ago to create the first ever Canadian online course in world religions to feature the Baha'i faith on an equal footing with Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. It wasn't until I retired in 2018 that I was able to devote the majority of my time and energy to furthering my first love and to becoming an intronaut, a term I coined for an explorer of the unseen realms of consciousness within. Due to the intensely personal nature of his encounters in the inner country, my father was extremely reluctant to share them with people, let alone to publish them for the world at large to read. Over the years, I gradually gained his cautious permission to read selections from the fish to a variety of groups, most of them Baha'is. I was happy to be able to report back to him that the responses were unanimously positive and frequently enthusiastic. After each reading, I was asked when the book itself would be published. Until recently, I felt I had no choice but to quietly put people off. Shortly before my father passed away in July of 2011, I promised him, sorry, where did I? Whoa. Sorry, I've gotten caught in my own paperwork. I promised him that I would one day edit and publish his waking dream journal. Now that my mother has joined him in the next world, I sense that the time for publication is fast approaching. So with your permission, I'd like to share 4 of my father's stories with you this evening. 2 of them feature interactions with Baha'u'llah himself. I will leave it to you to ponder the extent to which the Baha'u'llah in these stories corresponds with the Baha'u'llah you have come to know and love over your lifetime as a Baha'i. I've chosen these particular stories because of the points they make concerning 3 issues closely related to the goals of this course. They show us the value of, first of all, seeing things from a God's eye point of view. Secondly, transforming our personality traits into divine virtues, here symbolized as gold coins and jewels overflowing from a casket. And thirdly, pursuing the goal of life, here described by Baha'u'llah as acquiring richness of spirit. So this is a small sample of how my spiritual father, who also happened to be my biological father, introduced me to the quest for inner wealth at the time I had just entered my teens. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned that any progress we can make towards a greater understanding of a truly spiritual psychology is worthy of our time. The first story I'm going to read emphasizes God's interest in the little things we do, very much in contrast with our single-minded attention on the big things by which we seek to justify our existence. You will no doubt notice a distinct dreamlike quality pervading this and the other 3 stories. Curiously, my father told me that he had remained fully conscious during each conversation. Winifred also often asked him questions while he was in, as he put it, to which he could respond. This is why I refer to these dialogues as waking dreams. By the way, the line, "Little David was small, but oh my," which features in this, is from the song "It Ain't Necessarily So," from the Porgy and Bess opera composed by George Gershwin, DuBose Hayward, and Ira Gershwin in 1935. Okay, so sit back, relax, close your eyes if you like. Mark's going to read you some bedtime stories. This one's called The Little Things. I was walking along a country road in summer whistling, "Little David was small, but oh my." And suddenly little David appeared and slew me with a slingshot. As I lay on the ground, not feeling dead, but looking up at the sky seemed to open up and I could see a shining gold gap in the clouds. And I was borne up through the gap in the clouds and taken through the clouds to a scene from my childhood. A scene where I had taken a little Jewish boy's part against an onslaught by a friend of mine. The friend had said that the Jews had crucified Christ. And the little Jewish boy turned to me and said, "They didn't kill him, did they? The Romans did it." I believed the Jews had killed Jesus, but I didn't want the little boy hurt. So I agreed with him that the Romans had done it. and I saw myself put my arms around the Jewish boy's shoulder to protect him. And a voice said, "That was the first Baha'i act you consciously did." It was an unconscious, unwitting, and sincere expression of love to another. And I said it was so trivial, such a little act in relation to the thousands of others I did. And the voice said, "You should not underestimate its importance. You look at things from the wrong perspective. You look for the big things, but God looks at the little things. It is from the little things that big things come." Remember his eyes on the sparrow. And I still protested that it was such a small thing. And the voice said, "Was it such a small thing? You went against your own religion, your own beliefs, your own friend, out of love for what appeared to be a rough, dirty little urchin. But your heart took precedence over your head. It was not a little thing in God's eyes." And I asked, how do I see things with God's eyes? With my own eyes. And the voice said, "You have looked at all the wrong things in your life. Think of the delicacy of the way in which you have always treated people. You would not fight to hurt anyone. This the world told you was being a sissy and weakness, and you believed it. And this caused you agony. But you never failed to fight to keep people from being hurt. You never ran away when a principle you believed in was at stake. Think of the way in which you have always sought excellence in your work. You would not accept anything but the best. But the world told you this was not appropriate for a boy, for a man, and you believed it. And this was your agony. Think of the way in which you have handled your sex life. Your instincts were right. You always restrained from letting your sex drive hurt people. But the world told you this was not being manly, and you believed it. And this was your agony. Think of the way you tried to bring the joy of music into your home, to your friends. But they shut you up in a room with your radio and wouldn't listen. But you went on listening and playing anyway. But the world told you this was wrong for a boy, and you believed them. Think of the way you handled your parents. You bore their chains, you took their chains on your own shoulders to keep from hurting them. But the world told you you should hate your parents, and this was your agony. If you look back on your life, you will see your path, to Baha'u'llah shining brilliantly back to the beginning. This is apparent and obvious to everyone but yourself. This is why we had to put you through such agony, so that you would see the truth, see yourself with your own eyes, and close the circuit. The world in which you lived could not accept, could not respond to, or understand the Baha'i spirit. But it was in you from the beginning, and you lived by it, come what may. And this was your agony, because you believed that what the world said. But such dedication to love, God does not lightly put aside. And that is why you are destined for very great things. This is why you have been told you have greatness. And this is how you should see things with the eyes of God, with your own eyes. So the second story is called Looking for Wealth. In this story, my father is struggling to see the world from a perspective not shared by those around him. In the real world, he had recently returned to the Ottawa area after a 3-year leave of absence. With his family of 4, my father had fled the confines of what he considered the boring capital city in 1962, because it was strictly a government town, expecting that life in big business would provide more excitement than that in the federal government. He was hired as a speechwriter for the president of IBM Canada and moved his wife, son, and daughter to Toronto. And as most of you know, my sister Lisa is on the call this evening from her home in Toronto. As an aside, this also led to our family meeting Linda O'Neill, who was also on the call for the first time. We were just kids. She was then a young girl living across from us on a 1 block long street in Scarborough. What are the odds of that happening? I don't know, staggering. Anyway, it didn't take long for my father to realize that he was unwilling to compromise his Baha'i values in the profit-driven, cutthroat environment he encountered at IBM. This led to his reluctant decision to return to Ottawa after less than 3 years. With a heavy heart, he once again began to work for the federal government. This time as executive assistant to Julie LaMarche, the Minister of Health and Welfare, from 1960 to 68. So as you will see in this story, he interpreted his failure to succeed in the world of big business as evidence that he must be a real loser. Not surprisingly, he was eager to understand what being a winner means from a Baha'i perspective. He desperately needed to learn the meaning of true wealth. I should also point out that the stories are time-bound in many of their particulars. So for example, his coming reference to visiting Negroes in Harlem would likely be more fully nuanced if this story was being written today. Okay. So looking for wealth. I went to the tree and looked, and I saw a truck dump a load of sand and drive away. And I looked in the sand and saw a figure, myself, stuck in the sand. And the figure said that it was better to be in the dump than in the rat race, where you didn't have to have the power to win. In the rat race, you had to be tough to win, and it wasn't tough enough. He wasn't tough enough. And he would rather be in the dump than have the winners, the wealthy ones, look down on him and ridicule him. He couldn't stand to be mediocre in the face of the winners. After a while, the figure got up from the dump and stretched and looked at the night sky, and he saw stars twinkling in the inky blue and thought to himself, I suppose the poets and painters would think of it as beautiful, but it doesn't do anything for me. And poets and painters are almost never winners, never successful until after they're dead. The figure by the dump began to feel chilled. So he decided to go for a walk. And he walked along a country road in the moonlight. He walked looking at the telegraph poles in the sky until he came to a farmhouse. And he entered the farmhouse and sat down around the fire with the farmer and his family. And he joined them for coffee. And they seemed happy and content, but dull. He couldn't stand to be dull like that. They had never tasted the excitement of what life could be, so they didn't know what they were missing. But he had tasted it. He couldn't ever be satisfied in a farmhouse. So he left the farmhouse and walked on. And he walked to an exclusive ski lodge high in the hills. And he stood outside looking at the skiers and thinking of the wealth that had allowed them to be at the lodge. They looked reasonably happy, but not really joyful. But happy enough because they were winners and had money. Of course, there was the tension, the uneasiness of the rat race. But they had been able to take it and come out on top so far. Sure, someone might come along tomorrow and wreck them, but that's the way it is. And they drank together today and enjoyed it. The figure turned away in envy and sorrow at his poverty and weakness. And he went on walking, and suddenly it was summer. And he was walking near a railway line in the country, and it was green, and there was a golf course on the other side of the tracks. And presently a train came along, and he caught on to the last car and jumped aboard. The train was heading for New York City, and when it arrived, the figure got off in Upper Manhattan and walked into Harlem. He walked along the tired and dirty streets, and he climbed the rickety steps of the ancient brownstones into the poverty-stricken, overcrowded, filthy apartments. And he saw and he felt the poverty, the anguish, the hatred of the Negroes. And he felt, at least I'm not as bad as this. Of course, I'm really worse because these people never had the chance to win. And I did, and I flubbed it. And the figure walked out of Harlem to the riverfront, where he took a ferry to Staten Island and looked at the Statue of Liberty. And he laughed cynically. Yes, this land offers liberty to win and liberty to fail, but not liberty to be human. But I guess this is the way it is all over the world. Those who can win have the wealth, and those who can't don't. And he thought to himself, where can I go? It will be the same everywhere. But perhaps in Haifa, perhaps in the Baha'i atmosphere, I can cut myself off from the world and forget about this eternal conflict. And so he boarded a tramp steamer and arrived in Haifa. And he walked to the Baha'i shrines and in the Baha'i gardens. And then he walked to Baji, and he entered the house where Baha'u'llah was buried. And as he entered, he was almost overcome with a sense of dazzling wealth, a greater sense of wealth than he had ever experienced or imagined possible. And it was physical wealth and something more, a great deal more. And the figure was appalled to find dazzling wealth at Baji of all places. Where did it come from? Baha'u'llah had given up all his wealth, and the Baha'is could never have afforded anything like this. And he was so overwhelmed that he went outside and sat under a tree to recover and think. And presently Baha'u'llah came out and sat beside him under the tree. Baha'u'llah smiled at him and said, I was amused at your puzzlement over the wealth we have here. You know, wealth is a subjective thing. There are people who have great material wealth and feel poor. And there are people who have little material wealth and feel rich. Actually, the secret of the feeling of wealth is richness of spirit. This is what you must seek. And if you seek it, it will be granted unto you. But you must seek it. And when you have richness of spirit, you can decide for yourself whether you want physical wealth as well. And again, I was overcome. Baha'u'llah said, I must go now, but come back many times because I have much to tell you. And Baha'u'llah left me and walked back into the house. And I went back to sit under the tree at Baji. And presently Baha'u'llah came out and sat beside me. And he said, you have a great deal of courage to come back so soon. Not many people can stand exposure to the power of this place. And he said, but you can and must expose yourself to more and more, but gradually. And as he looked at me, it seemed as if he turned the power up. He smiled and said, don't worry, I'll keep it within your capacity. But you must learn to experience more and more. And after a few moments, I felt I would explode from the force of the power, and I came out of this. As he said, he came out of the world, of the inner country. Later, I went back, and Baha'u'llah said to me, you know, it's this power which I used on earth. I was but a man like yourself, but the power was channeled through me. I did not go around drumming up business, beating the bushes. My most important work was done when I was alone and contacting this power. The power is what did the work. I only followed through. This is the truth that you must get my followers to understand. My heart bleeds for them, frittering away their time, trying to drum up business, beating the bushes with the help of this power. What they must do is contact the power, and the power will do the work. All they have to do is follow through. There are so few who understand this. That is why I desperately need you now to communicate to them the real meaning of what I have said, to show them that I do not want followers, but co-workers who will do as I did, who will contact the power and let it do the work. Of course, I'm not offering you or them a life of leisure. You will have plenty to do, but the power will bring you the opportunities, will create the situations in which you can follow through. The churches have wealth, but they do not have the power, so they can do nothing. Baha'is do not need buildings or wealth because they have the power and it will do everything. You must believe in this power and come back again and again to expose yourself to more of this power. Actually, this is the whole purpose of man, to absorb more and more of this power, to expand his capacity to the fullest. Of course, there is a limit to which the human body can absorb the power, but after death, the soul will be able to absorb more and more infinitely. The third story, which I've called Introducing the Fish and Others, features a character called the Archbishop. I've placed this story early in the book because it describes the process of transformation that 4 of the aspects of my father's everyday personality undergo as they are miraculously transferred to his inner country, which he also knew as Bermuda. He never visited this island nation in physical reality. The closest he came was a brief business trip to Miami Beach, Florida. The hypercritical archbishop is here described as stiff, rigid, and aloof. It is clear from the rest of the conversations of A Fish and Others that he is a composite of all the Christian teachings my father absorbed as a boy and as a young man in small town Ontario in the 1930s and 40s. So this is a quickie, it's just one and a bit pages. Introducing the Fish and Others. The country of the pools, dark, cold, and menacing with tall grass. The abode of the demons, the abode of the yapper with steel jaws like a vice. The abode of the cringing creature with pathetic face circled with ugly hair. The abode of the archbishop, stiff, rigid, and aloof. The abode of the hangman, ominous in his cape of black. I saw the fearsome 4 lurking in the grass, eyes shining in the night. I approached the yapper and said, "Come to Bermuda." The yapper struggled, but he came, and in a flash, a fish appeared on the beach before me, fat and smiling, and I was shocked. I returned to the cringing creature who cringed but came to Bermuda, and in a flash, a beautiful blonde stood beside the fish, and I was shocked. And I brought the archbishop, desperately saying his beads, and in a flash, Jesus appeared smiling and stood with the fish and the blonde in Bermuda. His cross was with him, but he flung it away, saying, "Look what they've done with me." And I was shocked beyond belief. But I went back for the hangman, and in a flash, a bronzed athlete radiated at me on the beach in Bermuda. And again, I was shocked. And the fish and the blonde, Jesus, and the bronzed young athlete joined hands and did a merry dance. And I joined them, and we were happy on the beach in Bermuda. So these are really nasty parts of his character that are transformed as he moves into the inner country. And they have a lot to tell him. And then the last story is called The White Swan. In this final story, the self-righteous, cantankerous archbishop is unable to see Abdu'l-Baha as anything but a fool, and an old fool at that. When he first arrived in the inner country in the previous story, the archbishop was transformed into Jesus, a character who appears in a number of later conversations. However, this initial conversion didn't seem to have stuck very well. In other conversations, he returns as his old menacing self. In this story, which I'm fairly sure will be the culminating one in the yet to be published book, his transformation is more thoroughgoing and, may I say, permanent. Okay, it's a bit long, but I think it's worth the wait. So, the White Swan. I looked at the calamus in my left hand, and I saw the Archbishop standing by the Sea of Galilee, looking almost like Jesus Christ. And the Archbishop spoke to me and warned me that I would continue to suffer as long as I persisted in trying to exceed the limits placed on man. He said, if everyone achieves the freedom you seek, the world will be a chaos. Man must live an ordered existence and obey its rules. And I took the Archbishop unwilling over the mountains to the gardens at Baji. The Archbishop didn't like the gardens. He said they had a feminine prettiness, the stink of decadence, of Oriental mysticism. And suddenly he saw Abdu'l-Baha skipping along the roadway. The Archbishop said, who is that old fool? There's no fool like an old one. And Abdu'l-Baha approached us. The Archbishop stiffened into an aloof, self-righteous pose, closing his eyes. Abdu'l-Baha smiled and winked at me, and he pulled on the Archbishop's robes. But the Archbishop wouldn't move. So Abdu'l-Baha swirled the robes around the Archbishop's head. And the Archbishop said, mock me if you will, but I will not be provoked. And Abdu'l-Baha brought a couple of young children and let them play in front of the Archbishop. The Archbishop said, what are the children doing in this den of iniquity? Take them away. I said, you don't like children? The Archbishop replied, not much. And I said, but didn't Jesus Christ say they would inherit the kingdom? And the Archbishop said, oh, he was always going too far. We had to clean up a lot of the things he said. Do you know these Oriental mystics? They get carried away with their visions. And Abdu'l-Baha smiled at me and winked and went into the house. Soon he came out carrying a gorgeous set of Archbishop's robes, richer and more beautiful than the Archbishop was wearing. And Abdu'l-Baha held the new robes out before the Archbishop. I could see the Archbishop hesitate. He was obviously tempted, and finally said, oh, well, I can clean off the muck of this atmosphere when I get them home. And the Archbishop accepted the robes and decided that he might at least try on the new mitre while he was here. And he did, and it felt good. Then he ran behind a bush and tried on all his new clothes and came walking out proudly in his new garb. The Archbishop approached us and drawing himself up seriously, he said, I feel a sermon coming on. In this abode of the devil, in this den of iniquity, I will preach the everlasting truth of God. Sometimes we servants of the Almighty must venture into the very jaws of evil to carry the message. And suddenly the Archbishop began to laugh uproariously. And Abdu'l-Baha and I sat on the ground listening and amused at his antics. Then the Archbishop tossed off his mitre and the heavier robes and went skipping along the road where Abdu'l-Baha had skipped. And he came back, drew himself up before the two of us, and again started to preach. As I was saying, why the hell didn't you bring me here before? And he laughed again uproariously and went off skipping around the garden. As he approached the house, he looked back at us as if to say, who lives in there? And Abdu'l-Baha beckoned him to enter. And the Archbishop did so, and Abdu'l-Baha motioned me to follow, and we went up on the porch and watched through a shuttered window. And we saw the Archbishop kneel at the door of the tomb of Baha'u'llah, but kneel so that he could stand on his head, and walked around the room on his hands. He said, the world is upside down, and I have to walk this way to see it. And the Archbishop walked on his hands through the gardens until he came to a pool. And he entered the pool and went deeper and deeper until only his feet were showing. As his feet disappeared, a beautiful white swan swam on the water. And it spoke, as I was saying, why the hell didn't you bring me here before? Quack, quack. Then it dunked its head into the water and came up singing in a croaking voice, as it was in the beginning, it is now, and ever will be, world without end. Amen, amen, quack, quack. And it went on singing and ducking its head in the water. Once I was blind, now I can see. Hallelujah, amen. And lift up your heads, O ye gates, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is the King of glory? Baha'u'llah, he is the King of glory. And on he sang and swam and ducked his head. And Abdu'l-Baha said to me as we were sitting by the side of the pool, you know, we've been looking everywhere for the right swan for this pool, and now we have him. Isn't he beautiful? And I said, he's all yours. He's my gift to you. And Abdu'l-Baha smiled and said, my father and I, we thank you. We will be able to take better care of him here than you've been able to do. And Abdu'l-Baha motioned me back to the bush where the Archbishop had left his old clothes and said, we must clean up the garden. Come, we have a special room for these. We went into the house down a passageway where we found a room lined with Archbishop's clothes, but refurbished with the more beautiful fabric and jewels of the Archbishop's new clothes. Abdu'l-Baha said, we'll leave these here to be fixed up so that they can be used to help somebody else. Abdu'l-Baha said, I have things to do, so I'll leave you, but feel free to wander about if you wish. Tea is served on the porch if you ring the bell. And I went and rang the bell. When I got to the porch, a young girl in Oriental costume was laying a small table for tea. But there were 2 cups, and I asked who the other was for. She smiled, bowed, and left me. Presently, I saw the figure of Baha'u'llah approaching, and he carried a rich-looking box, a casket in his hands. He smiled and nodded to me, and I sat down. He said, this is for you. Of course, there's no paying or trading here, but I've seen the swan and would like you to have this, say as a memento. And I thanked him and took it. As I looked at it in my hands, Baha'u'llah said, well, don't just look at it, open it up. And I opened it up and I saw sparkling gold jewels and coins overflowing. He said, you know, we were speaking of wealth the other day. Here is a small sample of that wealth. It is for you to use as you see fit. But don't worry about keeping it. There's plenty more where that came from. Lavish it about as you please, and you will be surprised at the effect it has, both on yourself and on those who receive it. In fact, this is a process in which the more you lavish riches, the richer you become. As I say, don't worry about keeping it. In fact, you don't have to come back here to refill the box. It refills itself. Of course, if it becomes too small to meet your demands, bring it back and I'll give you a bigger one. But enough of that. Let's have our tea. And I bent over to serve him, but he interrupted saying, no, you are my guest. And he took a piece of fruit and cut it and said, I know you like lemon in your tea, but I would like you to try this for a change. It's a very special kind of fruit. I suppose you do read the writings once in a while and have seen reference to the tree of life. This is the fruit of that tree, and I make a steady diet of it. It's delicious for breakfast, with tea, for supper, as a snack at bedtime, or even if you wake up during the night. It has an immensely satisfying effect. You recall the power I mentioned? This is the source I was referring to. You must, of course, find this tree, but then you just have to eat its fruit. And I tasted the tea, and it tasted exhilarating. And I said, but where does this tree grow? And he said, why, you've seen it many times. Didn't you recognize it? Now, of course, you can see and taste this. You can see and taste of its fruit, but most people, I'm afraid, never get past seeing it in a book. And Baha'u'llah turned to me saying, oh, my dear friend, I do love you so much, and I do need you so much to lavish this wealth I have given you. I can no longer do it directly, and this is a bit frustrating. Of course, I have very important things to do, but there are so few friends I can give it to lavish it about the earth. I know I can count on you to do it and not to fail me. And feel free to come here anytime you feel like it. Bring any friends you may care to. This house will hold quite a crowd, and we will talk, drink tea, and enjoy the pleasure of each other's company. But now I know you have things to do. I will not detain you. And with a smile and a nod, Baha'u'llah went off into the house. And as I turned to go, I looked out from the porch and saw hundreds of faces looking up towards me. And the crowd was so thick, I wondered if I could walk through it. But I took the box and tossed gold coins and jewels to the crowd, and a way was made for me to pass. So I realize we're early on in our evening still, so we have time for comments and questions. I'm curious to know if you had any reactions to those stories. Do you think you'll take away any gems from them? Did they tell you anything useful about the human soul? Did they provide you with a sense of direction for the exploration of spiritual reality? Okay, let's open up the phone lines and see what people are thinking. Don't all talk at once.
There are a lot to absorb, Mark.
Oh, I can't hear you, Maury. I'm not sure.
Can you hear me now?
My problem.
Oh.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, if there's quiet on this side, it's because there's a lot to absorb. Your dad was speaking from a deep place, and an altered sense, well, let's just say a deep place. So I'm still absorbing it, but it was I loved the conjunction of unconscious things as well as spiritual things. I found that very unusual. That's how I see it, but I don't know.
I know it's a lot to absorb. You're quite right. I'm throwing a lot at you at once. I don't like doing that.
Mark, did you know that Winifred's grandfather was from Bermuda?
Oh, for crying out loud.
Heather just wrote that in the chat.
Oh,
so he was tapping into something.
Weird.
Mark, I wanted to say two things about your dad's stories. I've heard some of them before at David and Master A's firesides years ago. One is, well, maybe three things. One is the inspired quality of these stories, and I think they're coming from the imaginal realm, the Alame Mithal. If I'm saying that right, Fuad, Alame Mithal? I don't know. They're very picturesque, and
yes,
they capture the lighthearted side of religion, and religion should be lighthearted. It's too serious for a lot of people. I think one of the things that repels erstwhile seekers about religious people is that they're too serious. And, I remember Stanwood Cobb telling us at Bolak years ago when we were Baha'i youth back in the day. Remember that, when that was?
Yep.
He said the difference between Abdul Baha, whom he met 5 times at Greenacre, well, no, not just at Greenacre, 5 times in total in New York and in Greenacre and Haifa. He said the difference between Abdul Baha and all the other gurus running around at Greenacre was Abdul Baha had a wonderful sense of humor. And, your dad captures this lighthearted aspect of spirituality, which we need, He was always asking the friends, are you happy? Are you happy? If you're not happy now, what day are you waiting for? And so on.
Right.
The promised one has come, eternal life is yours. teach the cause. What are you worrying about? The glad tidings are here. So somehow your father, Mark, penetrated this, perhaps even in an archetypical way, the world of Elame Mythol, which is a big world and is a world of many different images. But he did that so successfully, and that's, you know, the wonderful gift about that particular piece of work. I mean, to see Abdul Baha skipping along might bother some people, but it doesn't bother me, because it's a wonderful way of saying Abdul Baha was telling us, be happy, be lighthearted, be joyous, you know, dance, sing, skip.
Exactly.
So that's how your father's stories affect me. They're just wonderful.
Well, it's interesting. And the fish talks about wanting my father to stay away from sober sides, as he called them. He suggested that he stay out of bars and cathedrals. So I'll be out there in the fresh air, for crying out loud.
Yeah, that was, you know, in the poetry of William Blake. I know Belinda's there and David's maybe somewhere lurking around, but in the poetry, oh, there he is. In the poetry of William Blake, you will see that he was a very strong anti-clerical. He hated the clergy. I think that, and he hated them because they killed the spirit of life in people. That's what Blake didn't like about the clerics, and that's how he wrote them up in his poems. Of, you know, adding to the joy of life, they were killjoys. And it was the same thing that Jesus detested in the scribes and the Pharisees. They were too serious when they fasted. They were made the long faces. They were overly pious. They bound onerous laws on other people and made them observe them. And, you know, the strongest condemnations in the gospel from Christ himself are against those clerics, because they pretended to represent God, and yet they perverted everything holy with their cruelty and their over seriousness and their legalism. So I think your father really is onto something there. I think he captured so well that joyous spirit that Abdul Baha asks us all to have, which is, I admit, is very difficult at times during COVID. I'm not always joyous myself during these times, but you know, we can uplift one another during this time. And your dad has done that, even though he's not here with us anymore. He's still doing it.
Right.
I was interested in the first one, which talked a lot about the strictures of gender, and I'm not sure that was you don't think of that as something that was being discussed or seen in the late 50s, early 60s, and it's a sort of dialogue, discourse that people are having now. That what does it mean to be? What is maleness? What is femaleness? And that's and the strictures of it. And what's important is to have a good heart, is to be, you know, part of the divine.
Right on, Heather.
And Mark,
Yes.
I'm on cloud nine. This was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, I'm just floating in the sky. But I want to ask you a question about something you said near the beginning.
Okay.
It was along the line of you've been sitting at the feet of giants, or you've been basking in the light of great ones.
Yep.
Are you talking about figures other than Abdul Baha, Baha'u'llah, Ibn Arabi, Ken Wilber, your dad?
Those are the ones I
Who are
mean.
those people? Who are the, yeah.
Those are the main people, although there are some expert interpreters of them that have helped me a great deal.
Nader Saidi and
they're
such.
secondary. Yeah.
Okay,
they're
you weren't
secondary.
hiding the list then. You mentioned all those figures.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
I'm seeing some comments now in the chats. Oh my goodness, Maury, what? Whew. I hope you didn't have to type that all in. You copied and pasted, I hope.
I did.
Okay, you got. I'm going to enjoy saving this and reading it later. So I feel like I've thrown a blanket over everybody. I don't know, somehow I was expecting a little more response from people.
Mark, I have another one then.
Okay.
I think you were talking about, you know, the ontological circle and those 7 terms of the arc of descent: will,
Right.
determination, etc. Okay, and you say they may not mean much to the average person, but you think that, I think you said Nader Saidi has unpacked them.
Yes.
Did he unpack them in the book Gate of the Heart? Gate of the Heart, or is there some other better
Nope.
place? Yeah.
I think it's his first book, Logos and Civilization.
Oh, that's where, because, you know, chapter 8 of the Gate of the Heart has a description of those. Maybe it's more elaborate in the other one. Okay, but Nader Saidi, those 2 books.
About 20 pages or so.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're going to review those ourselves later.
Yeah. Yeah, all of this is sneak previews you gave us, right? Sneak previews.
Yeah.
Coming
Yeah.
attractions. Yeah.
That's right.
Mark, I think Bill has a question.
Oh, hey, Bill.
Where are you, Bill?
He's got his mute on. There he
So
is.
I was struck by the degree to which metaphors of materialism were very smoothly transformed into, you might say, the physics of spirituality in these writings. And it occurs in your dad's writing, and it occurs to me that the metaphors of materialism would have no meaning as a metaphor unless there was still a strong attachment to them, and that there's also kind of an ongoing struggle, as I think you have with dreams, ongoing struggles, an ongoing struggle between that materialism and the attachment to it that separates us from the ability to fully take advantage of the spiritual education or element that's around it. I just thought it was very interesting that as deeply spiritual as your dad seemed to be, that it was a reference to materialism that allowed him to see the spiritual physics of things.
I don't think I've ever heard that expressed that well before. That's interesting. We're all going to have to write an essay on this in the next week, right?
Bill, I've just posted, I like your expression, the physics of spirituality, because I like that very much, because it does tell us that there are laws and dynamic laws in spirituality.
Yeah, there's a physics to the whole materialism thing as well. You know, the who's a winner and who's a loser, and that's all a very unfortunate construct that we have in society. But I think one could argue, if one had nothing better to do, that it was that the physics of materialism is hijacked from the physics of spirituality.
Yeah.
Mark Durham has a comment or question.
Oh, great.
Actually, I have a question. Beautiful presentation. Really appreciate it. Much appreciated. But speaking of physics and engineering, usually if there is gravity, you go straight up and straight down.
Right.
You know? While we're talking about the ascent, the arc of ascent is in the shape of arc. Why it's shown as an arc rather than straight line to go up and down?
Hmm.
Good question, yeah.
Now, is that a rhetorical question? Do you have an idea?
No, I'm not sure. I just, when you mentioned physics of spirituality and so on, I said, why are we going like this, instead of going straight up and down? We say levels, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But this one, there must be a reason why it's created in an arc or a circle, There must be a reason.
Well, the native people must respond very well to this idea, I would say, for that very reason.
Mark, if there's a center of power, it would pull things, in a circle. Abdu'l-Baha has an unpublished. There's an article. There's a something called the Tablet of the Universe.
Yes.
And I think it's loaded with new physics and new spirituality. But there are circles everywhere. Some circles are bigger than other circles. And, why wouldn't there be a curve if there's some sort of central power pulling things along in evolution? Yeah, why not circles?
Huh.
And
Well, of course, the circle, first of all, is a well-known symbol of unity, Veram. So if it's lines going up and down, that's not exactly a symbol of unity, but the circle is a symbol of unity. Of course, it doesn't mean reincarnation, that we keep going around and around and around the circle.
That's where it becomes a spiral, which is the shape of the expanding universe, as far as we know.
And Abdu'l-Baha did draw, one of the few drawings I've seen that the master drew was, and I saw it many years ago at Bolak, and I even forget when I was a young man who showed us that. But they said that Abdu'l-Baha had, drawn this spiral, which is, of course, an open-ended, never-ending, ever ascending universe figure. And it reminds us too of, Mark, you'll recall that in the poetry of, now I'm going to do one of these moments where the bubble bursts and the name is gone. Who's the Irish poet? David, if you're there, I'm thinking of
Yeats?
Yeats, yes, of course. Thank you. Nobel Prize winner in literature. The gyre. He was using the gyre as one of the main symbols in his poetry, which is, of course, related to the spiral.
How interesting, you mentioned the word spiral. Two of you have mentioned it. And one of the ideas that helped to construct Ken Wilber's thought is something called spiral dynamics, which we will be investigating in the winter. Another teaser. I see Alan is making comments. I'm wondering if he would want to share some of that verbally.
I can certainly do that if my microphone works. But what I was thinking is that if you have a slope, then what you're doing is you are either building on top of what you've already accomplished or done, or if you are removing complexity to make it simpler for people at the bottom of the circle, if you want, then what you're doing is you're also going through a process of removal or change that's built on what happened previously.
I think that's one of the feelings I've had about the Baha'i faith for a long time, is that it's standing on the shoulders of all the other religions. Baha'u'llah didn't necessarily make reference to everything that had been said in previous religions, but I think he is expecting us to know that history in order to be able to make full sense of what he's saying. How is it a corrective? You know, where did we get off the track? If you don't know the history, you don't really realize that. Go ahead, Jack.
Okay, so here's another thing about the circle. Now, in T.S. Eliot's poem, and I forget which one it is, maybe David can remind me, and I'll have to paraphrase him. He says how does he put it? We come back. David, can you quote that for me? I can't, it's not coming into my brain, but the idea is,
the end of all our exploring will be to come back where we started and know the place for the first time.
That's it.
That's it, yeah.
Do you want to repeat that, Harold?
The end of all our exploring will be to come back to where we started and know the place for the first time. Something like that.
Yes, yes. So to come back to where we started and know the place for the first time. Okay, here's the thing. We go around the circle. You know, Abdul Baha says, if you don't pass that test, it's going to keep coming back to you until you deal with it. So poor old Sisyphus, you know what he was condemned to do? He would roll the rock up the mountain, and then it would roll down the mountain, and he'd have to roll it back up again. And he was condemned to do that for all eternity, the poor guy. Now, Camus said he could defeat that punishment if he accepted happily the punishment that he was given. That was Camus' wonderful idea. I don't know how, and he would become free that way. But so here's the thing: we go around that circle, but then we realize we're not the same person that started that journey. We've gone through those tests. Some of them we passed, some of them we failed. We keep going around that circle, but we're the same person, but paradoxically, when we get back around that circle, paradoxically, we're not exactly the same person, because we've acquired more experience. We've grown spiritually, so to speak. So in that sense, the cyclical journey, even though it's not reincarnation, in a sense, the cyclical journey is a good thing if we can keep improving our character as we go. That's the challenge somehow, and it takes a lifetime.
One of the things that I found intriguing was somebody's point in Ibn Arabi about him, that we're not so much acquiring divine virtues as ridding ourselves of the human ones, because the divine ones are there underlying our current display. They're waiting for an opportunity to show themselves. But it's our clumsy egos, etc., that get in the way of that display.
Yeah, well, that's right, Mark, and that's the symbol, of course, of the hijab, the veil in Sufism. If you remove the veil, I mean, I'm affirming, Mark, what you're saying. If you remove the veil, then the virtues, you may discover that the virtue is there on the other side of the veil.
Mm-hmm. I'm just reading the chat. I noticed that Wendy's making a very interesting point about the arc of ascent and descent, but in a different way. Maybe you could talk about that, Wendy. Randy, where'd you go?
Well, while she's mustering her courage, I got another question, unless she pops up.
Okay.
But, you know, Mark, this is all about metaphysics, spiritual metaphysics. You know, I'm in love with this stuff. You know, but there's not much permission to deal with it in everyday life. However, the Baha'i faith is loaded with it. Like, I want to read something that we're all familiar with. I testify unto that whereunto have testified all created things, and the concourse on high, and the inmates of the all highest paradise, and beyond them, the tongue of grandeur itself from the all glorious horizon, that thou art God, that there is no God but thee, and that he who hath been manifested is the hidden mystery, the treasured symbol through whom the letters B and E have been joined and knit together. You know, when I was a baby Baha'i, I started reading the prayers, even before, like when I was a seeker, someone gave me a prayer book. That's in the long obligatory prayer, and it's a metaphysics lesson. At least I interpret it that way. Baha'u'llah wants people to review their metaphysics every time they use the long obligatory prayer. I was ecstatic. I thought, you know, I have found a better religion, that this would be front and center to remind us of these levels of reality. At least that's what I think this is about. Five levels of reality here.
That's it.
I think they're Hahut, Lahut, Jabarut, and a few other things.
Malakut
Malakut
and Nasut.
and Nasut. It's all here.
Yeah.
In the obligatory prayer, in other words, it shouldn't be just for metaphysicians. Everybody should bask in the levels of reality every day, at least when they're reading the long obligatory prayer. So sorry, I'll shut up, but I got so excited that this whole thing you're doing is an excuse to climb levels of reality and come back and go around in circles and stuff like that.
I see Wendy's joined us.
Mark.
Okay.
Hi, sorry, it took me a while to get onto the right screen. I'm on my iPhone.
Ah.
What I would say that what I was offering is on the mundane side, but it's not a mundane thing at all, because it's what Baha'u'llah, in fact, and the institutions ever since him have given us. So I was saying, it's just another way of signifying our institutions of the faith, but it happens that it's an arc of ascent and descent, if you want to look at it that way, which is on the one hand, the arc of ascent, the individuals electing the Baha'i institutions all the way up to the Universal House of Justice, whether directly or indirectly, and then the center of the covenant throughout the lesser covenant that we've got, appointing the institutions of the learned, the institution of the learned. So you can also picture that as an arc of ascent and descent, and not mundane because of the source of it in this day and age. Although it has a material reality, it comes from the divine.
I like that.
Yeah, we've been using it in Baha'i children's classes at places like Robsey Children's Camp and so on for years, but it popped out at me as soon as I saw your circle when you sent us the notes.
Linda's just passed me a note saying that Durham and David Andrews have their hands up, waiting to patiently to have a chance. Let's hear from David. We haven't heard from him yet, and then we'll go to Durham.
On your microphone, I think it's on.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to acknowledge my teacher. Thank you very much, Mark. It's absolutely fabulous to be with you again, and all of the people. And I think of all of the people in this course as my circle. We're all in a circle. If we were together, present in a room, we'd probably be sitting in a circle. And as I'm listening to the conversation, I'm not thinking so much of ascent and descent as up and down, but if I visualize it as a series of concentric circles, descent might be coming from the outside into the center of the concentric circles, and ascent going from the center of the concentric circles, maybe out to whatever the outer rim is and the next rims are. But instead of up and down in a ladder or linear way, if you just think of it as circles within circles within circles, it's just an easier way for me to think about it and visualize it. And so many things in physical reality are designed and created and evolved that way. Nested loops, I know we'll get into that later. So yeah, okay, that's essentially what I wanted to share.
Well, that's very interesting. That's like a pre-taste of another point I'm going to be making in a later class in Sufism, where they have all of the believers in Islam on the outside of a large circle.
Okay.
And think of it as a bicycle tire. And then there are spokes that lead into the center, which are the paths, if you like, or the ways, the roads that lead in. Those are the particular forms of Sufism that take you into the center, which is the reality. Right? So it's sort of the reverse of what you're talking about. It jumped to my mind as you said that. So we'll
you can go in
and
and come out. It's a two-way street or a two-way.
Well, yeah, it is a two-way thing because there is the process of going to the center, and then once you've had that experience, coming back out from it as a transformed person.
Yes.
Interacting with people at all the other levels.
Yeah.
Anyway, Durham, you had a point I think you wanted to make.
Harold mentioned something after I asked my first question, gave me the idea to ask another question.
Yeah, that's great.
And he mentioned about the power and centrifugal and so on. But if I ask myself, who is at the center of that arc of ascent and descent?
Okay.
Is it the manifestation of God? All the manifestations of God represented there? Like this, the most powerful, when we speak about spiritual power, I would say manifestations of God will be in the center in each period of their life.
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I mean.
Yeah, it resonates for me. I don't know. Bob LeBlanc, I haven't had a chance to hear from you yet.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I just really got excited about this concept of to find your spiritual qualities, you have to get rid of your human qualities or your weaknesses. So the spiritual qualities are already there. You get rid of those human ones. It's just a different way of looking at it. It reminds me of, I think it was Michelangelo, when he was carving, there would be a big block of stone and he would just see the beautiful Pieta within it and just chip away the rock until this beautiful creation came out.
Beautiful image.
Such a nice way of looking at getting rid of your human qualities. Where did that come from, by the way, that idea? Somebody just mentioned it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think it was William Chittick who was talking about that, actually. I'll see if I can find it as we move along in Ibn Arabi, but it's a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
But if I could say so, Mark, as a follow-up to Bob, Bob, we know that from our own experience too. I mean, not just the scholars talking about removing the veils. Of course, the imagery of the veil is all through Sufism, all through the Baha'i faith. But yes, we know from our own experience that if we remove the veil, as you said, or the impediment or the sickness or the malaise, whatever you want to call it, then we'll discover that inherent quality is there because it's built into us. It's built into the soul, and those veils come between us and our own spiritual virtues, if you like, our own spiritual experience. So now in the circle, as perhaps has been suggested, think of the image of circumambulating the shrines. Okay, so yeah, Harold, these are exciting conversations, aren't they? You think of the believers circumambulating the shrines. Well, things gravitate. Mark, you were talking about the wheel and the spokes of the wheel. Things gravitate to the center. They're centrifugal force. So remember what changed Sutherland Maxwell? He had a block in understanding. And when he was on pilgrimage with me, the master asked him, so where is God? Of course, he knew what was in Sutherland Maxwell's mind. He wanted to help him. And Sutherland Maxwell said, well, Master, God is everywhere. And you remember Abdu'l-Baha's famous reply? If God is everywhere, God is nowhere. And then he led him there to the concept of the manifestation, who's at the center of all things. And that's, if God is everywhere, God is nowhere. There has to be a centrifugal force, a central point. We think of the nukta in the Bob's writings, the point, the primal point, the first point. What a central image is. In Baha'u'llah's writings, there's a whole imagery that Fuad can tell you about the pen and the ink and the dot and the letter and the words. And it's a wonderful architecture. So, but that explanation from Abdu'l-Baha was what took the veil away for Sutherland Maxwell. And that's when he really became confirmed in the faith, when he understood that, as you're saying there, Lam, who's at the center? Well, the manifestation we know is at the center. Are they all there? I don't know. I don't know if they're all there, but we know Baha'u'llah's there, that's for sure. And I guess the other manifestations are there. So,
okay, Jack, sorry, I have to cut you off. I've got a line up here.
I know, I'm sorry, I talk too much. I can't help it.
Let's go to Ingrid first and then Maluk.
Hi, I'm just so thrilled to be able to take part in this course. What I wanted to say is of the fish stories, which I find they're deep, but in such a charming way. The one that I particularly am resonating with tonight is your first one, Mark. And this is a course where we're really focused on deep thought and deepening understanding. But the first one talked very much about, it was so sweet about the figure putting his arms around that little Jewish boy, and it speaks to seeing with the eye of God and how our little actions, how we act in the world, and the little day by day actions are so important. And it's those little actions that move us along, on the arc. And so as we go about for the next week and look forward to the course, maybe we can dedicate some of our little actions, to the course and to your dad's memory and to Doug Martin's memory, and really try and improve our behavior and our actions and try and make some of our actions be a little bit more divine and God-like over this week.
Beautiful. Okay, Maluk.
Yeah, actually, I'd go back to about 3 previous comments what Bob spoke about you know, Michelangelo and the carving. And it just reminded me of a time where I was actually working with, you know, Aboriginal friends. As many of you know that I'm active, you know, in that you know, strata of people, and I just love being with them. And it was at that time that I started learning about wood carving. And of course, whenever we get together, we will be drumming, and then that was mostly women drumming and chanting and singing, and I always chanted, you know, in Arabic while using the Aboriginal drum. And I remember one time when I picked up a piece of wood and I wasn't sure what to do with it. And then one of the friends, you know, mentioned to me that, you know, just be in tune with your spirituality, and the piece of wood will tell you what it wants to be, you know. And sure enough, I started carving without knowing what I am doing. And I'm sitting not far from these two pieces of carving that,
Oh boy.
Can you see them?
Yes.
Yeah, so I had no idea they're gonna be like this. And this is the spirituality that actually it was meant and was expressed to me, that you know, it will manifest itself, you know, without me, you know, what is that? Materially, you know, thinking. Just be the spirituality taking you. Be spiritual and you will be inspired to what you are supposed to do.
So you mean be a channel?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Get out of the way and let it do its thing.
Exactly.
It comes back to that story about the power, letting the power do it for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's how
And I
she
have to say-
sculptured me.
So,
Well, you're a gorgeous piece of work there, I have to say. Okay, who else anybody else got a comment? We're getting close to 9:30. I don't know if that bothers. Nina, are you doing something there? I couldn't tell.
David, do you have a comment? Your hand is still up there.
I could, yeah.
Please.
Okay.
Please, go ahead.
Just in response to Miluk's story, what she's describing is a way of being. That is ontology.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you.
That's it.
You know, Mark, I think of, we left out centripetal forces. If there were nothing but centrifugal forces pulling us into the manifestation of God, we would all become perfect a lot quicker than we're actually becoming so. So that, you know, it makes life interesting that there are all these distracting things going on. All the things that are not your arc of ascent course are pulling us. And, you know, the shallow materialism and corruption and temptations to talk behind people's backs. Wow, we have a battle going on between centripetal and centrifugal forces. So that's why we have to sort of revisit this theme frequently and go back to the prayer book and devotionals to keep those centripetal forces at bay.
Well, it seems to me that, I mean, the whole idea of this course is that we need to fully acquaint ourselves with the best ways that we have available to us to allow those divine qualities to rise to the surface. Once we can figure that out, then we can share it with people, right? We can be examples that they will look up to and try to do the same thing. But if it's all unconscious, then it's very difficult to articulate to anybody. So that's what I'm aiming to do, is to try and acquire a language, a terminology, if you like, that we're comfortable with, that makes sense to us, that actually works. And I'm, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the world is our oyster, and we can choose vocabulary anywhere we want from any language. English is great at doing that. So Why don't we do that?
I put a link to the quotation from Baha'i Library from Shoghi Effendi about concentric circles,
Oh,
beginning with the tomb of, beginning with the dust of the Bab and going out to the entire planet in concentric circles. So you'll be able to see that in the chat room. But that's another, coming from the center of the covenant, that's another example of concentric circles. And certainly the manifestation is at the center of it. And the power of it is felt.
thank you for finding that, Wendy. That's great.
Yeah.
I'll reread that with interest for sure.
Yeah, well, Mark, Wendy, I've realized more clearly what you were trying to say in your comment about the arc of ascent and descent with the institutions. I must admit I had trouble with your explanation. I didn't get it at first. And then it occurred to me that if we think of the faith as the institutions and the believers, it's both bottom down, top down and bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
Top down and bottom up. It goes in both directions. The flow of spirit and knowledge and so on goes in both ways. And so that's how I understood what you were trying to say, because I couldn't see how the learned, I'm not sure, you may want to look up that phrase, the institution of the learned. I'm not sure it's, when I was serving as an assistant many years ago, we got a letter through Ted Oliver from the House of Justice. I don't know if it was a copy to the NSAs or whatever, but they said it would be good to not to use that expression because learning cannot be institutionalized. If you think of an institution of the learned, it might give the friends the idea that those people are the only ones who are learned, which is of course not the idea that we're trying to.
No, it is the name of the compilation about all of the appointed institutions, though.
Yeah, I know. Well, sometimes the vocabulary changes, like it used to be the study for the sacred text, and then it just became the study for the text. But it's just a minor comment that in the faith, there is learning, and it belongs to people that are both in and outside institutions. But anyway, I certainly got your message by thinking of top down and bottom up. Then I understood what you were trying to say.
I'm kind of curious to hear what the view of this talk has been from Belize. I wonder what Wayne's thinking. You posted a comment early on saying that you needed more time to think about the stories of the fish, but I'm wondering if anything has occurred to you that you'd like to share. Not necessarily about that, but anything else we're talking about. You're muted at this point, Wayne, sorry. There you are.
Yeah, well, for me, I'm just observing the entire conversation as they go along.
Yeah.
And well, I'm not too much of a talker, so what I do is place my little comments in the chat box.
Okay.
For people to read, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But so far for me, I mean, it's more than educational. It's all good. I mean, it's deeper than I would have imagined or thought.
Okay, so you might come back.
I'll be back.
Okay.
And there's a lot of fish in Belize.
I mean, yeah,
aren't there a lot of fish?
I mean, for me, there's lots to learn here.
Okay.
So I definitely will be back.
Fantastic. I wanted to make sure we didn't forget about you.
Oh no, I'm so appreciative of that.
Okay,
But I'm right here listening and passing my little comments.
excellent. Keep doing it. We're going to send out all the comments. They're so rich. My goodness. Maury's just put about 15 comments in here already. So Linda and I will make sure that everybody gets a copy of the chat that's been going on after this is finished. So I didn't really mean to put you on the spotlight that way. And I realized that we hadn't heard from you. That's all. Okay, so we're at 9:35. I don't know if people want to continue on or whether you just have had enough. What are you feeling?
It's enough for tonight for me.
Okay.
I could go longer and longer, but I've got other things I've got to get to, but it's been a great start.
Okay.
It's time to go home now.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, thank you
Thank
all.
you, thank you. It's been fabulous.
Thank you very much, Mark.
All right. Well, let's get together again in a week, and I hope you all received my revised schedule. I'm sorry for all the screw ups there. Holy cow.
And Mark, don't forget to send out the homework.
Yeah, I think there's lots in there for you already that I don't need to detail. Anyway, thank you so much for all coming together. It was a fabulous evening. I really enjoyed myself. I hope you did as well.
It was great.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mark.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark.
See you in a week.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See ya.
Mark. It's been fantastic.
Okay, I enjoyed it too. Thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you.
Aloha pa.
Aloha,
Bye,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Good
Mark.
night.
Thank you,
Okay.
Linda.
Hey,
Thanks, Mark.
good night, everyone.
Night all.
Bye,
Thank
wait.
you.
Night.
Good night.
Hey, Maury.
Bye.
Okay. Let's see who's last to leave.
And thanks to Linda,
The
our
hosts.
hostess.
Yes, absolutely.
She's been doing a lot of running up and down the stairs, actually.
Got to get you to read the chat.
I saw Linda in the background racing up the stairs.
Yep.
It's hard to read the chat and teach at the same time, I think.
That's true.
It's a little too complicated.
Okay, folks.
Thanks,
Good
Mark.
night,
See you in a
David.
week.
Brenda, thank you.
Nice
Okay.
to see you, David. Night.
Good night.
Good night,
Good night,
Mary.
Mary.